I understand first impressions can be important, but I'll have to ask for some patience. I believe I have learned some things that would be useful for the general public to know with regards to some controversial matters. But to be effective in addressing them, it will take some time to earn the trust required. Trying to reveal certain things all at once would be about as useful as not saying anything at all, and I want to do this as well as I can. Because when dealing with controversy, where the stakes are high, the truth, whatever it may be, would likely be unsettling to at least half those involved. And care must be taken to ensure that we do not justify rash action or inaction with ideas that cannot stand to the rigors of honest, well-informed debate. It may be difficult, but there are certain issues that must be addressed to ensure that truth, justice, and liberty are ideals we pursue, that these words represent something more than pleasant rhetoric. Greater minds than mine have determined that truth is necessary for justice, and that certain liberties are necessary for the pursuit of truth. Chief among these liberties is the freedom to speak. I understand that the prospect of unfettered speech can be frightening, but rather than perpetually stamp my feet and demand the world respect my rights, I'd like to demonstrate how this right to speak can be used for the public good, and that this can be done in some rather unorthodox ways. Maybe then the prospect of willful ignorance, censorship, and the fear of the other won't be so dangerously appealing. So, without further ado, welcome to the Section 32 podcast. Episode 1, The Covington Incident. The audio of our dialogue for this episode was recorded on February 5th, 2019. Our primary concern for that discussion was the state of modern journalism, which we consider to be at a low point. The Covington incident seems to be a rather clear indication of this low point, and I'm confident that our coverage of the incident can be compared favorably to the early mainstream coverage. On January 18th, 2019, protesters demonstrated at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The Black Hebrew Israelites preached as a larger group of Native Americans engaged in their own demonstration. Covington Catholic high school students arrived on the scene after participating in a pro-life rally. Nathan Phillips, a Native American man, approached the group, chanting and playing a drum. Nick Sandman, a white student wearing a Make America Great Again hat, stood and grinned when approached, and the two stood face to face for a time. An edited video of this event was posted by the Twitter account @Fight2020. Without the context of the full video, viewers were led to believe that the students gathered around Phillips to intimidate him. Early coverage of the event supported that faulty interpretation. Based on that interpretation, some Twitter users called for violence and death to the students. The full video is available online for those who care to see for themselves. Retractions have been made, but not everyone involved has admitted fault. Lawyers representing the Sandman family have sent letters to over 50 individuals and organizations in preparation for libel and defamation cases. Names such as the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, The Guardian, and National Public Radio are included on that list. All right, thoughts?
Well, I would like to say that I'm very glad we've now, not glad in the sense, I don't think this is a good thing, but I am very happy that we finally reached the point where it has gotten bad enough in terms of the kind of insular and bubble-like nature of the media that they finally went after someone who had enough, deep enough pockets to actually take this to court. I do expect most of the big names in that list you mentioned will probably just settle. I'd be very surprised to see any of these cases actually get into a courtroom. But the reaction the media had when someone actually started pushing legal action against people who were instigating the harassment of this kid, um, tells me a lot that they are scared and they are concerned about. They're realizing maybe they've gone a little bit too far. I'm not super optimistic, but I'm glad we're finally at this point where like they might finally be realizing they have a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important for everybody to, you know, take the own initiative and understand that, that the audience is a part of the equation. And if we can just, you know, engage in the content that they're presenting with a reasonable amount of skepticism, then we're not going to have the problem isn't going to be as big as it was before, even if they continue to do what they do.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the starting point, since the idea of this discussion is kind of an overview of the decline of modern journalism, let's start with what do you think in an ideal world is a journalist's job? What is the media as like the quote unquote fourth estate? What is their role in our society, ideally speaking?
Well, ideally speaking, I think the journalist's job would be to present to the citizens information that is, well, it's true, first of all, and hopefully something that can conceivably used for the purposes of whatever the public would like to do, and that would include keeping in check the power and the motives of other establishments.
Would you say a good way to sum that up is something along the lines of it's the job of the media to empower the average citizen to engage civically in the society around them?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree with you on that. I wonder how much of that is after the fact, what do you want to call it? Whitewashing of what they've always been. I sometimes wonder, I mean, you know, of the two of us, I'm definitely the pessimist. And I wonder, you read about the days of yellow journalism. You read about what people like Joseph Pulitzer actually got up to, what William Randolph Hearst actually got up to as, newspapermen. And you wonder, were they ever really interested in empowering us to make a decision? Or was it always a way for people who are maybe not politically powerful, but are definitely socially powerful to manipulate the citizenry for their own agenda?
Yeah, I suppose you could definitely make a case that hey, there's never been a point in history where human beings have been perfectly virtuous.
It's always had problems. Yeah,
Yeah, so but like I think a lot of things can be done for to improve things if we can just become more aware of the opportunities that are available to us.
absolutely. So,
Like, yeah.
if we're going to talk about um, the decline of journalism, I suppose we should kind of itemize to some extent what our main criticisms of the state of the modern industry consist of. So, I'll let you start on that, but like if you could think of the three biggest problems you see driving with both the state of modern journalism or that's driving the state of the industry.
Okay. So one thing that is a big concern, I think, is how connected some of these institutions are with business interests and established political parties.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's that concern that what is it? You have to be nice enough to your interview subject so that you can continue to have access to them for news. I mean, I understand that, you would probably want to have more productive discussions and you'd want to conduct things diplomatically, but at some point you probably could conceivably have an ethical obligation to really confront somebody with their wrongdoing. And I think that's something a lot of people are bringing up as criticism with Joe Rogan and Jack Dorsey.
Yeah, I saw
Have
that
you heard?
story.
Yeah,
I saw he's now gonna have Jack on again and do like another more critical interview apparently, which I'm kind of surprised Dorsey signed up for. But that's a good example of it. I think to kind of repurpose the phrase, if all you ever do is comfort the afflicted without ever afflicting the comfortable, you're only doing half your job as a journalist, right?
yeah. And so there's this book that I've read, and I I read that this week, and I thought it was just absolutely perfect for the sort of things were that we're interested in talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
This was Neil Postman writing "Amusing Ourselves to Death: Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business," and pretty it's a short book, but it's a pretty good crash course in uh, media history, starting back when writing became a thing and how that changed the culture and encouraged people to, structure their thoughts better and abstract more. And there's, codes of law that can be brought into being, and the political discourse in America in the earlier years, it was a lot more substantial, like really heavy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And once, think I'm going to feel like a 30-year-old boomer here once I start complaining about the Telegraph. But but yeah, that's something that he pointed to is like once you get information that's not just transmitted physically, that's like far, far away from your present location,
Mm-hmm.
you get little bits of information that are totally disconnected from anything you can really have any effect on. And that started to, in Postman's view, that started to have an impact on uh, the kind of journalism that there would be in newspapers. Like there would be just these short, juicy little bits of things that no one could really do anything about. And then photography came into existence, and that made people focus more on visuals, and then you have the same sort of thing happening with television. Like what was it back in the 80s? I suppose he said that the average American was watching 4 hours of television a day, when in, instead of that you would have just had to read to engage in any sort of media in your free time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you would understand the world outside of your present location instead. So,
I think there's also an element, I mean, in terms of like the seeming baseness of American political discourse over time,
mhm.
an element that is probably uncomfortable to talk about, but that should probably be mentioned is part of that comes with the fact that over the last 200 years, we've changed the franchise from just a small group of well-educated landowners to everyone, right? You're going to
Sure.
get a different kind of political discourse when, you have a working class farmer as your as a member of your political base, or you have a, inner city retail worker as as another potential, person engaging in politics in this country. That's going to bring a very much a wider variety of perspectives, and I think consequently it's going to lower the overall level of discussion to the lowest common denominator because you have too many people to appeal to.
So, is it your position that we should reduce the franchise back
Oh,
so it's
absolutely not. I'm not. Yeah, no, 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 no. It's a good thing we did it. I'm just saying that there are consequences to doing that, and one of them is you're going to have a less educated, less articulate, less, you know, erudite sounding political discussion because now you don't have to appeal to the equivalent of, wealthy New England wasps as your main demographic when you're a politician. This is where you see like the embarrassing attempts by, Hillary Clinton or Elizabeth Warren or even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to say nothing of some of the stuff Lindsey Graham's been saying lately, these embarrassing attempts to like be extremely online and kind of imitate that kind of Twitter discourse to sound like a relatable millennial.
How do you do, fellow kids?
How do you do, fellow kids? I'm just chilling in Cedar Rapids. It's
Yeah.
it, I'm borrowing a quote from, of all people, Xi Jinping about the French Revolution, but the consequence of universal franchise is that we don't actually know the full ramifications of it yet. It's too soon to tell, right? And there are a lot of things you're just going to forget about that, much like how the French Revolution took away a lot of good stuff about Enlightenment Europe, you're going to lose a lot of stuff about 19th century America when the voting demographic is drastically different. But again, I maintain it's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is important to, if you care about every citizen in the government, in that the government takes care of or manages, or however you'd want to phrase it, like you really do need to make sure there's some system in place to guarantee that the interests of every individual is represented to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And that is tricky when you can't, when, like, how can you trust that every person is able to represent their own interest in a rational way?
I don't even really think about it in the terms of representing their own interests, because that always, I've grown to hate that phrase because I think it conveys a line of thinking you know better for someone than they do.
Yeah.
And that assumes a level of infallibility on your part that I don't really subscribe to. But I do think
Yeah.
there's a level of, this person has very different interests than me. I don't understand how they think this is in their interest. Ergo, I think they're wrong, right? As opposed to, we just have different perspectives.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
I think it's fair to say in at least some individual extreme cases, there are times when it's pretty clear that you know better what's good for another individual than they do. In the case of parenting,
yeah,
I suppose we could limit
but we
that
don't
to
let children
just
vote.
that. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
so I don't see the hypocrisy. Once someone attains the age of majority, you kind of have to just assume on some level they're a reasonable moral actor, and you can't kind of assume that they need to be in your custody in some fashion, whether that's
Mhm.
how they vote, whether that's how they live, what they believe, dumb shit that they do. You got to let people be idiots until they harm someone else with their idiocy. And I don't think a vote is capable of harming someone directly. So,
Yeah.
but I would say if I had to sum up kind of the three main things I see as the biggest existing flaws in terms of modern journalism, kind of getting us a bit back more on topic. I see it as a problem with cliquishness. I see it as a problem with a overwhelming focus on first to report, especially now in the digital age, and a focus on controversy. Right?
Hmm.
We've taken, if it bleeds, it leads, to kind of the nth degree right now when it comes to media, and not just when referring to violence, but any sort of controversial or salacious or you know some sort of just, it's going to get a rise out of people kind of content only compounds the desire to be the first one to say something, if it even if it sounds too good to be true, which is kind of what happened in the case of this incident with Nick Salmon and the Covington kids. Everyone wanted to jump on what seemed like, oh, that's perfect. That is exactly, this utterly confirms my biases. This will make a lot of people very happy. This will make a lot of people very mad. Get this story out, and this is going to be the thing. And I'm going to have all of the ad revenue that I need. I'm going to make my quota this week, and BuzzFeed isn't going to lay me off the next time layoffs happen. There's this level of it's funny because they in many ways a lot of like the quote unquote media clique on Twitter especially seem very much out of touch and kind of in their own bubble, but there's so much kind of panic and desperation that drives a lot of their actions. And I have to assume on some level they're self-aware of the state that their industry's in, of the kind of, jobs they work, the nature of the people who hire them. I mean, I don't think if these people were smart enough to make it to get their 4-year degree and work for someplace like Vice or BuzzFeed or even the major channels like CNN and Fox, I think they have to have at least enough, mental awareness to kind of realize that they're not where they like things to be, and that's why they're so sensitive about the media being criticized.
Yeah, it's it's a tricky situation, and I my hope is that the people involved can just realize at some point they need to start operating ethically. But if that's not going to happen, then
Well, that's where we get into some of the research I did because I'm not sure. Part of the problem, and the media have been saying this is one of the things I agree with them on is good journalism does not pay,
yeah.
and it may never pay ever again. And so I looked up a report just to give you an idea. This is before the 2016 election, but I looked up a report by a nonprofit called the Knight Foundation, and from what I've seen in research so far, they seem to be a very stereotypical kind of old guard media nonprofit that cares a lot about journalism education. They care a lot about ethical journalism. They have some of I guess what you would call the red flags for like an organization that's a little too much of an insider media nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, I kind of take their account of the industry seriously. So in 2015, they released a report on the state of the industry. And there were a lot of things I found very, very interesting. That kind of tips to where things wound up going. So I don't know if you know this, but in the 1990s and the 80s, journalism was the biggest cash cow major for universities outside of computer science. It made bank for schools. For obvious reasons, it's very cheap to operate. You don't need a lot of expensive technical equipment to do like run a journalism school. It was fairly easy to get accredited. Um, and that didn't taper off until starting around 2012. Even through the 2008 financial crash, which I don't know if you remember this, but that actually severely affected uh, print media. Like, I'm actually kind of surprised doing this research. I'm a little surprised in hindsight how much the media were fans of the Obama administration because they were probably one of the worst industries in terms of their recovery from the 2008 crash. A whole bunch of regional newspapers folded in the wake of that crash. The Seattle PI went away, right? Rocky
The
Mountain News.
newspapers folded.
I didn't even think about that. But the New York Times and News Corp, Fox News during first term Obama had to refuse dividends and write down the cost of their acquisitions. That's how bad it was for the media after 2008. And starting around 2012, 2013, when we were kind of in the middle of the whole recovery period, a whole bunch of like what you would call celebrity journalists, the ones who like their names, the Nate Silvers, the Glenn Greenwalds, um, they jumped to all of these VC funded online only media platforms. Nate Silver started 538. I forget after the Independent, where did Glenn Greenwald go? He went to the Guardian for a bit, but I don't know where he is now. It doesn't matter. Anyway, a lot of these guys jumped ship hoping that this new kind of like VC funded alternative media could supplant the old mega newspaper kind of guard, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've been seeing now this month is that didn't work out. That venture capital is pulling back from alternative media and digital only kind of outlets because they just don't make money. because no one pays for news because we can get it for free. What I'm saying is part of the reason journalism's in the state it's in is that journalists have a piracy problem.
Yeah, well, I think there's the subscription model for things like what's it called? Subscribestar. Patreon used to be
Yeah,
something someone like serious people were caring about, but yeah, that's sort of payment processing service. That's something I feel that it might change things a little bit. Like people who really care about systems operating properly would be interested in voting with their wallet in that way.
the problem with the online payment processor model, the monthly subscription or the per video subscription model is outside of a small minority of people that works for individual operations or
Hmm.
maybe like partner operations, very small teams who are, still reliant on outside news sources. Like I like Tim Pool,
Hmm.
but Tim is utterly dependent on the media writing articles for him to reference, for him to talk about, for him to discuss these issues because he can't go to every single major news story that breaks out. He can't put boots on the ground. He can't be around there to get that information. And I think we're seeing the overall death of the kind of, globally active news organization. I don't think that's possible anymore
Hmm.
in terms of being financially viable. I mean, obviously running it's possible, you know, but I almost wonder if the future going forward is going to be localized teams in specific regions who then kind of network with other teams and regions, just kind of, provide each other content under a kind of a quid pro quo thing, but mostly only farm their income from local citizens or people who are kind of because part of the problem right now and something I wish we could get away from is the way that it's divided up right now isn't based on region, which is how we used to do it, right? You had your city newspaper, you had your statewide coverage, you had your national coverage. We now do it by ideology, and that I think is not mentally healthy as an alternative, right?
Yeah, yeah, you really need to get varying perspectives in order to make sure you're not in an echo chamber. So, I mean,
It's an interesting conundrum. I'm not sure how it can be fixed. I mean, I like the chaos of it failing right now. I'm glad that it's becoming apparent that this was not a successful direction because I think the most recent direction that the media took to try and become profitable once again was incredibly toxic and damaging to, civil society. I want to see them find a way to make good coverage financially viable. I'm just not sure if it exists outside of very, very niche operations, right? It's how do you incentivize people to want to pay for or want to give eyeballs to or otherwise reward coverage that is honest, that is kind of insightful, groundbreaking, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't somehow involve just kind of satisfying your political ideology, which is what we got now. Even I like again using Tim Pool as an example. I like him, but that's partly because he agrees with me on a lot of issues I find very important. I don't know if I'd like him as much if, regardless of content, if Tim was really into identity politics or was significantly further right.
yeah. So, all right. So, guess I'm at a loss right now.
Well, I mean, like, what are your hopes? Because I mean, you place a lot of importance on this Covington latest incident as being like a watershed moment in some fashion.
Yeah,
Eh,
I think that's something that I need to I'll stand by that, and I'll say that what my hope is that uh, collectively more people start to figure out that they need to have there needs to be an adjustment in the way uh, your average person relates to the media that they're consuming, and what is the general philosophy they have for determining what is true and figuring that out.
mhm.
And I don't think that things are going to be that there's going to be any that we're going to be able to manage society successfully if people continue to just uh, passively absorb the information that they enjoy absorbing. There needs to be some sort of shift in values towards seeking out information that you can use to uh, have an impact on, improve the way you're participating civically.
Mhm.
I, yeah, this amusing ourselves to death thing that it really, to me, that book really does a good job of illustrating exactly how the shift started towards like, um, I guess people starting to become a little bit more complacent civically
Mhm.
and not being as involved in local issues. Uh, like the comparison that he's making a lot is towards uh, the Huxley dystopia in A Brave New World,
Yeah,
where
the
the yeah
everyone's too distracted by hobbies or cheap entertainment to really be all that concerned about the dystopia around them.
yeah I mean it kind of feels like we're inching closer to that.
I it's more plausible than the Orwell version of a dystopia, but I imagine,
Mm,
if we go full on, cyberpunk and horrible dystopia, it's going to be something neither author particularly predicted because neither of them really saw the internet coming.
yeah, I mean this would probably look like this is the sci-fi world to someone living 100 years ago.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, so
Dude, 100 years ago, this is sci-fi to someone in the 80s.
oh
You have
yeah,
a tiny computer in your pocket you mostly use to look at porn and cat pictures, and you get them downloaded through the sky?
yeah, this is all
What?
wild stuff. Well, I mean, television and radio, you get content from the sky too, but
But television,
yeah,
radio, or massive global network with all the human knowledge uploaded onto it, you know?
yeah.
It's a difference of degree. But I think you brought up an interesting topic with civics education or
Hmm.
engaging civically. And that is something I'm a little concerned about because I've seen, even within the time I was within school, civics education got increasingly deprioritized. And by the time I graduated, you had to kind of be a political junkie to have a good civics education at
Hmm.
this point. I
That's a
took,
shame because that's something, you'd want to have that to be a citizen, right?
yeah, it's tremendously important. Like the amount of people who think things like, the House can on its own impeach Trump, or that if they impeach Trump, then somehow Hillary Clinton or a Democrat becomes president, or the election is redone for some reason. The basic, like, what used to be seventh grade civics concepts that I don't think people really know or they don't care to remember. That might be a difference. It might just be a cultural, shift in the perceived importance of knowing about it. But it is concerning, and as much as I'm usually leery about trying to turn the public schools into a way to socially engineer good citizens. That's a little Orwellian for me, but if you're gonna do it, please make civics more important because it's tremendously important, and not enough people are as well versed in it as they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it has to be something Orwellian if you just present the facts of like, okay, these are the structures that we have in place. Like, if anything, if you're trying to distract away from what that is, that's a little bit more dystopian, I'd say.
Yeah.
Like, oh, how does the government work? Oh, well, who knows? Let's focus on gender studies.
I recall, I mean, I'm going to say this with the caveat of I understand that the internet, and in particular Reddit, are not good places to source a concept of what the average person thinks. But there was a fascinating thread on, of course, the politics board on Reddit, where they were talking about the possibility of impeaching Trump with the new Democratic House and stuff. And there was a point where, certain users were missing such basic concepts that like other posters started asking, "Are you actually old enough to be on the internet unsupervised?" And they're all like, "No, man, I'm in college, or I'm in my mid 20s. I just didn't follow anything political until Trump got elected."
Oh
And
boy.
they're like, "Oh, I'm concerned. Oh, I'm concerned." Actually, speaking of him, that's a question, and I'd really like to get your opinion on this. How much do you think this current state of hysteria,
Hmm.
which really, I
I
mean,
know the phrase you want to use.
I'm not going to go for Trump derangement syndrome. It just in general hysteria because
Okay.
it doesn't just
Yeah.
apply to him. It applies to like when people talk about the yellow vest protests in France, people get weirdly invested in French politics all of a sudden, or when people are talking about Jeremy Corbyn, or when they're talking about Venezuela. It's a general hysteria, and I wonder because I remember the last really bad big case of media hysteria, and I wonder how much of it is just driven by the fact that it is currently Donald Trump who's in office. And even if he gets defeated in 2020, or if a more moderate Republican is elected in 2024, or even especially if a Democrat's elected in either of those years, if a lot of the panic and the doom speaking and all the concern will kind of just like simmer down. And this is all just a part of because the media has to deal with a very anti-media president, which to them is a catastrophe, right? The previous catastrophe was uh, 9/11 in the Iraq War, where they had a very, very different swing in the flavor of hysteria. The media went very, very right wing, went very, very natalist and xenophobic and kind of aggressive and all about intervention. They cheered on the Iraq War all the way through. I wonder if these are just swings that happen because there's too much of one set of like just kind of this is where I get into the cliquish thing. There's just a set of people who, when a couple of them start freaking out, the whole industry freaks out, even though it's not necessarily warranted.
Yeah, I just don't think that Donald Trump really does very much to inspire confidence in uh, things being in a state of normalcy.
Oh yeah,
Whether whether or not that's warranted, he doesn't really present an image of things being as they have been.
he breaks both the superficial presidential norms and the ones that actually kind of matter a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will be very interested to see the arc of how this goes over the next decade because it can't last. We're way past peak woke. I think we're this latest incident and the backlash to it and the fact that they're now being dragged into courts over it. I think we're past peak woke, and I wonder what's next. If I wonder basically what they'll try and see as a strategy for making money now that this has obviously not worked out.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add that I think that if we're in a situation in the culture where the media is generally in some state of chaos and disarray, it comes down to the average citizen to uh, investigate the truth on their own. Like, because if we don't have like we can't continue with this idea that there's such a thing as a post-truth era, and that's just something we can just accept and tolerate. That's no way to.
Speaking of dystopian,
Yeah, seriously. It's
I'm of two minds about it because, on the one hand, there's one perspective I see that resonates with me and I think is more mentally healthy on an individual level, and that is a lot of people are just starting to tune it out. They're like, okay, these guys are out of touch with reality. Everything I hear from them is the end of the world. The world hasn't ended. You know,
mhm.
to borrow a very common phrase I hear a lot in the magosphere, the world hasn't ended. I have more money in my paycheck. It's okay. These guys are just losing their minds, right? Um, I I think that's more mentally healthy on an individual level,
Yeah.
but not on a societal one. To just, I mean, it can be in some ways. Getting people to like something I've seen a lot. I have very typical. I like to use my parents as kind of a barometer for your average center left Democrat Party member,
Hmm.
right? You know, they're like eco hippies. You know, they're kind of into a moderate welfare capitalist economic agenda. You know, my parents are my barometer for what like your average middle-aged Democrat's thinking, right? And I've noticed more and more they are caring a lot less about national elections, mostly because it just pisses them off, and they're focusing more and more on local politics. And I think that's a positive step.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good.
And if that's what happens for most people as the media kind of like destroys their credibility, I think that's a positive. I'm really not confident that's what most people are going to do though.
Yeah, I mean, local politics, that stuff really does matter. And it's something that where your individual vote has a greater impact for local elections than it does for like a presidential election.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah,
I think I've kind of come to terms with the fact that since I don't live in a swing state, uh, presidential voting, federal voting in general, is just purely symbolic.
yeah.
Like, it's funny. I had to explain it once to a friend my logic process for we were discussing the potential 2020 election. Because I haven't voted for either of the two major parties since 2008
Hmm.
because I've always been in Democratic strongholds, so electorally it doesn't matter. Um, but I was explaining my logic with a potential, 2020 vote where it was like, okay, well, if it's if the DNC candidate winds up being a corporatist kind of neoliberal, like someone like Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, I'll probably vote Libertarian. If it's a moderate kind of interesting, someone I believe kind of center left person, then I'll probably vote Democratic. Unfortunately, there's only one person in that ticket in the field right now who fits that description. And then I was saying, like, if it's one of the crazy people, if they go deep into the identity politics, I would probably vote Trump out of spite, mostly so that there's enough of a drop in Democratic votes in Washington that maybe the local party would take notice, right? And I guarantee you, most voters do not put that much thought into their vote when they're contemplating how they're going to vote ahead of time. It's this is why I keep saying we need more civics education because even if it's not for everyone, people don't really think about the impact the electoral college has on your decision or all the various like inter-party squabbles and dynamics. Like I wish in particular we taught a lot more about the war between the Democratic Republicans and the Whigs in the early 19th century. Because I've been reading about that, and that's been fascinating from a strategic voting perspective. I don't know how much you know about that time period.
I I must have studied it at some point, but I don't remember very much, to be honest.
Usually in American schools, it gets boiled down to War of 1812 happened. Jackson got elected, which freaked out the founding fathers. Uh, Trail of Tears happened, and then we're going straight to the Mexican American War. Right? You get
Mhm.
really bullet pointed, but there was this whole like squabble between the Democratic Republicans who were kind of being like usurped to be like a workers' party, and the Whigs who were kind of like your stuffy conservatives. Comparatively speaking, the Whigs were more likely to be like the descendants of the original founding fathers, the wealthy, educated landowners who all lived in like the original 13 colonies. They didn't live west of the Appalachians, and the Democratic Republicans were all the frontiersmen
Mm-hmm.
who had been out in Kentucky because this is when Kentucky was the frontier. And at that time, uh, journalism hadn't like the whole like there were still pamphlets and stuff, but newspapers hadn't like proliferated the way they did after the Civil War, right? So you didn't really have like a media to take a side in this argument, and it was mostly just like almost like a Soprano style drama in DC itself between people like Henry Clay and Jackson and Van Buren, and Clay and Jackson detested each other, right? Jackson basically, in many ways, I mean, I've been saying for a while, if you want to kind of get a perspective on the whole Trump thing, look up Andrew Jackson's presidency because it was basically a 19th century version of what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Didn't Trump invite comparisons?
he did.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how strategically smart that was of him, but they're there. It's a guy who got kind of elected as a fuck you to the Capitol. The existing multi-party establishment hates him, thinks he's a madman. The average voter. This is a little bit different compared to Trump, but like the people, as it were, loved Jackson. He really had a lot of parallels with like let's say a less ruthless Caesar. Where the Senate hated him, but the people loved him, so they kept like encouraging him to keep doing his own thing in the executive branch, independent of Senate and the Supreme Court, to the point
Mm-hmm.
where he more or less told the Supreme Court to fuck off when they told him not to do something one time.
Didn't he say, didn't the quote go something like the Supreme Court has made their decision, now let them enforce it?
Justice Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforcement. Yep.
Yeah.
And Jackson appointed a guy called Roger Taney to the Supreme Court, literally as a fuck you to Marshall,
Oh
because
boy.
Marshall, I can't forget if they had like personal drama, like they won't both went after the courting the same girl at one point, or if they just really didn't like each other. I can't remember what the source of their like disagreement was, but Taney just was there entirely to basically troll uh, Justice Marshall, John Marshall. It didn't work out for the best because Taney also wrote the absolute worst decision in the Supreme Court history. So there's that. Taney's the one who wrote the Dred Scott decision.
Oh boy.
Yeah, the one that right after Congress had barely managed to salvage another potential civil war and come up with a compromise to like basically let Missouri not be a slave state if they let the South enforce fugitive slave law in the North. It wasn't a great compromise, but at the same time, that was when uh, Taney wrote the decision that basically said, this is a time when the majority of the North is pro-abolition. He wrote a Supreme Court decision that said, uh, black people in the United States have no rights the white man needs to respect. That was a majority decision by the Supreme Court in the 1850s.
Jesus Christ.
It was so
We
bad that there was an entire conspiracy theory that the entire federal government was bought and paid for by a mysterious slave power. Like it was basically a southern version of the Jews run the world conspiracy theory. It was fascinating. If
wow.
Lincoln hadn't won the election, I'm pretty sure the North would have seceded. Like no one was going to tolerate election results in that particular election if
Hmm.
it didn't go their way. Anyway, I'm way off topic. I apologize.
Okay. So
So let's sum up. Like, okay, so what is your take on the incident with the Covington kids? What do you hope comes out of it? What do you think is the main takeaway to have from what this all means, and what are your hopes for the legal case?
all right. Well, just starting from the legal case, my hopes are that the uh, people involved in the case are doing what their job is and the truth is properly represented. And in terms of the reaction from this, my hopes are that just the people who were involved in this, uh, they either realize that what they have done was inappropriate, or the people who were paying attention to them realize that, okay, so they messed up and on this point, and the next time they try to drum up some action to something that's an emotionally sensitive point, then uh, there there needs to be some skepticism.
I'm going to quickly interject on that note and say, in particular, for the various celebrities who really, really went over the top in
Kathy
getting angry
Griffin.
at these boys, particularly Kathy Griffin, Jim Carrey, shout out. Please get help.
Yeah,
This goes beyond just simply disliking a president or disliking a particular side of the political spectrum. This is, I'm worried about your mental safety.
yeah,
Please
and
get help.
it's just horrific. Like, this stuff can have real consequences. Tim Pool, I like him too. If anyone in the audience is looking to get the anti-Tim Pool perspective, then it's not going to come up here.
I could probably help a little bit, but not entirely, because I do think overall he's tried.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, so yeah, sure. Let's get sidetracked a little bit talking about Tim Pool.
Oh,
I
okay.
feel that he is a unique actor in all this, and he really does care about the ethics of journalism and representing the truth appropriately and in a responsible way. In terms of his political analysis, I'm not confident, or his political philosophy in general, I'm not really going to say that he's especially sophisticated on that front, but I don't think that's especially important. He he does his job well,
Oh yeah,
and
no.
that's yeah.
My beef with him is not with his politics. I mean, I don't agree with his politics. He's still somehow a Bernie Sanders fan. And I don't fully understand that, but um, no. For me, the main thing I have with Tim Pool is he has a problem a lot of people who work in media kind of develop over time, which is placing uh, far too much concern on issues of optics.
Mm-hmm.
Optics are important. Optics are not the be all end all, and that's part of why in the lead up to the Trump election, he had such a hard time kind of, he didn't go full hog like, oh, Hillary's going to win, everything sucks, like a lot of like, Bernie supporters did in the aftermath of that primary, but he did think a little too much like, oh, Trump's finished because of X bad optics thing or Y bad optics thing. And I think that's one criticism I have for him. I also think he tends to it's less so on his main channel. His main channel is great content as far as YouTube journalism is concerned, but on the one that he does like every day, the Timcast one, he has a tendency to like rephrase a point the same way 5 times in one video. But
Mm-hmm.
they're also way lower production value. He's just reading an article and going off the cuff on it, so the standards are different.
Yeah, he puts out like what, 4 videos every day
Something like that.
on his own. Yeah, that's yeah. Um yeah, and gosh, what was I gonna say? Oh, yeah, I will say that he does make some interesting predictions. Like I think there are times where he projects something into the future with, I'd say, maybe too much confidence.
Yeah.
But
Like I said, he's a person.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
So
like, he's operating ethically as far as I can tell, and that's a damn sight better than what a lot of people involved in this whole kerfuffle are doing. So,
Oh yeah, I mean, even on the like literally, so this on his second channel, it's literally just him reading articles and kind of just giving his opinion on op-eds or articles or hot takes or whatever he finds on the internet.
mhm.
So by all standards, not a high bar of quality journalism, but even there, he goes above and beyond to disclose, I know this person, or I've talked to this person, I used to work with this person. He's very like, here are my biases ahead of time. Now let me kind of tell you with that in context, let me tell you my opinion. And I like that. I don't think there's enough of that.
Mhm.
So you were saying you hope with this Covington case that everyone kind of does their due diligence to kind of like go through the actual case. So do you want this to go to court? Do you think it'll go to court for a lot of
Well,
the lawsuit targets?
well, I think I'll agree with your analysis that the really big names with deep pockets, they're just gonna, you know, um, what's it called? Just
Settle out of court.
yeah, settle out of court. That
Although that assumes the Sandman family is willing to take the money. I don't know if they are. I haven't
I
really looked
think.
into how well off they are or how. I know they're getting some free representation, some pro bono representation. But yeah, it's a question of if they take the money.
I
You
I
can't
hope
exactly force a settlement.
I hope that, well, yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know too much about that, but I hope they don't, and that, the stuff does go to court so we can, you know, air out some of the nonsense that's been going on and have, have some of these institutions and people just face reality and learn to be more civically responsible.
You know what I genuinely hope doesn't happen if it makes it into a courtroom? I still think it won't, but if it does,
Hmm.
please, please, Trump, do not comment on it.
Oh
Just
God.
just let it do its thing. Don't bring public attention to it. Don't I mean it's already politicized. I can't say don't politicize it, but just leave that one alone. I don't want to hear your
Yeah.
nickname for the lawyer. I don't want to hear your hot take on the case. Just please. This is one case where you are not helping if you get involved.
Yeah, it's like I want to be able to give an honest account of what's going on here
Mhm.
without coming off as like, oh, you're just defending Trump. And then whoever I'm talking to, the brain is just going to shut down.
Yeah, it's
If
like
yeah,
the only way in which Trump is related to this particular incident is just the fact that the people who got harassed had a tangential association with him through their hatware.
yeah, yeah, he was wearing
Just
the
don't.
MAGA hat. So
Just can we talk about that too?
sure, yeah,
The
yeah.
push to make this is okay. I'm gonna indulge in my inner Tim Pool and whine about optics. So if you want to present the case that you aren't a bunch of people who utterly detest this country, utterly detest this country's norms and values and all the American propaganda, the PR for America as a country, right? If you want to position yourself as not hating that at its core, why would you try and make wearing a hat called "Make America Great Again" a hate crime? You can say it's distasteful because Trump. Okay. You can say that you think people who wear it are stupid because that means they support Trump. Okay. This push to make it like a full on like it's the hatware equivalent of asking for it in terms of just justifying harassment on people. Bad optics. It looks
Yeah.
really bad.
And can, like, maybe, maybe for some of us that, like, we could do a little bit more to try to take the statement at face value. Like, the literal statement, make America great again, I don't see how that's, like, horrifically offensive.
It's a Ronald Reagan phrase. Like it's not some unique new evil. I feel like the people who get utterly triggered by the catchphrase are like people who watch Leave It to Beaver and just start like seething. Like they think Leave It to Beaver was like exactly what 1950s America was like, and that like behind every Rockefeller painting there's or not was it Rockefeller? Who was the dude who did all those like
I Rockwell?
Rockwell? Thank you. Yes, Rockefeller is something else in New York that involves trains, I think. But all those Rockwell paintings, like these people seem to think that behind every Rockwell painting, the 50s was just like a field of like dead African Americans and gays. And that's like what the 50s were. It was just constant horrific racial oppression and then like a tiny I don't know. It's a bad look to start cheering that make America great again is some sort of horrifically hateful statement. I like this country. I want this country to be great again. I may not agree on the methods the people who usually wear that hat want to do it in, but I still want the country to be great again.
Was there a time that you would qualify America as great?
Yes. Um, Genuinely speaking, I think America was phenomenal in, and this is grading on a curve. We got to look at the world at the time
Yeah. Oh
America came to
yeah.
be.
That really plays into things.
Yeah, so grading on a historical curve because everything matters with context. I think up until about honestly probably the Jacksonian era, I thought America was culturally some amazing powerhouse. I think post World War One, America was phenomenal. Even if we kind of got dragged into World War One on false pretenses, we were still amazing in that. I think we deserve, screw the complaints about coming in late for the war. We deserve all the awards for World War Two. I think
Mhm.
um, this one's a little weird, and I'm probably going to get some flack from the more anti-imperialist libertarian wing, but I think the first Operation Desert Storm was America doing a good thing. In that way, I think the first Korea, up until MacArthur kept trying to like intimate he was going to nuke China, the Korean War was also a good thing on the part of the United States. Intervening to keep like liberal democracies from being attacked by oppressive dictatorships. Well, okay, that didn't happen in the Korean War. Never mind. But we were protecting a capitalist dictatorship from a communist one. That was all the Korean War was about. But I think America is perfectly capable of doing great things, and I want us to try to get back into living up to the PR behind our country because I do think we have.
The shining city on a hill.
Yeah, no joke.
Yeah. We used to be something that other people from other countries would aspire to be more like or to, you know, be a part of in a
Well, and
well,
honestly
I mean,
speaking,
that still kind of happens, but
you look at all the countries now. I still think we're in the front running. I would not want to live
sure,
anywhere
yeah.
else but America. I've lived outside of America. I wouldn't do it again. I didn't like it. You know?
Yeah. And yeah, like I really think if America's on a decline, it will affect the rest of the world too. And this is the country that's going to be most tolerant of me trying to meddle with the culture
Yeah.
and the government. So
It's an entire
I can't
country
be
that's like,
I can't be an activist in China. That's not going to go over well.
no, we are an entire country that's run off the principle of fuck you, I'll do what I want.
Yeah, I love that.
It's the best. I used to, I remember when I was in college, I was very full on to like being a democratic socialist. I was that kind of kid who kept pointing at like Sweden as like an example of the future. And I went to Sweden literally to study their economics because of it, right?
Mhm.
It's different. It wouldn't work here. It's not as good. If you want to imagine the best when the Nordic model, like for Sweden, was at its very best, the Rainmaker model. It'd be like if the only beer option you could have was Coors. If you had to drive a Ford or GM, and if you wanted to import a Toyota, it costs 3 times as much. Netflix is your only streaming service. Comcast is your only ISP. Oh, and by the way, 35% of your paycheck goes to the government. Every paycheck. And no, you don't get a rebate. Like, I just one of the things I like about travel is travel kind of cemented my opinion that as much as I love the rest of the world, this is the country for me.
Yeah.
And that's why I
Yeah.
want to see it get better.
Yeah. And the whole like comparing the present to the past in terms of what was better and what was worse, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. Like I think it's safe to say that, a lot of things are improving and a lot of things are decaying. And the things that are decaying, we should pay attention to that, look at history and think about, okay, how can we bring things back to a better state in these specific cases? And whatever's improving, just let it improve.
Since yeah, I agree. I agree. So I would say, just to kind of give my overall sum up of this issue, I find it distressing in the sense that it is a new low for the media to whip up some kind of crazy, almost internet lynch mob against a kid who literally just stood and smiled. You know, someone I follow once referred to that picture as like the equivalent of political Rorschach test. You just see in that face what you want to see, right? And I think I'm optimistic. There are a lot of signs that this particular flavor of new media is dying, and that's good. But I'm really, really stretching to kind of find what can replace it that's better. That's not prone to all the same kind of faults that drove the current, state of modern journalism. I think at the end of the day, I do agree with that one op-ed the New York Times put out. It's probably the most smart one for the whole, out of the whole Covington thing, which was to say we have to get off Twitter.
Yeah,
Journalists need.
Twitter's no good.
It's not even just like Twitter has a lot of issues, and I don't like Twitter as a platform. But if the journalists went from Twitter to Facebook, it wouldn't make it better. What happens is they need to not. We need a new generation of journalists who are not, as they say, extremely online. We need people who talk to humans in person, who get their news from a variety of sources, who, when they get a potential big story, do the bare minimum of vetting that the story's true. All of this stuff that proved the initial video about the Covington Catholic kids and Jake Sandman or Nick Sandman, I forget, but
Nick,
Nick
yeah.
in particular as being fake. That was all for the most part. There might have been a couple videos that I'm forgetting that came out later, but almost all of them were on the internet and available when the story went out. People found out that that Indian activist, Nick Spencer.
Nathan Phillips.
Okay, I got the name completely wrong. Well, um, people found video of him providing, words directly contradictory to what he said in his initial interview within like 5 minutes. Like, I understand the rush to promote, but if you can't find a way to put some kind of filter between what you get as your source and what you output as your journalism, you're not doing journalism. You're just regurgitating rumors.
Yeah.
And that means no one trusts you, which is where we're at. Gallup did a poll in 2017. Only 51% of Democrats trust the media overall. Only 39% of independents. Only 23% of Republicans. We're
Yeah.
we're at a point where you're hitting a level of a lack of faith in this institution that, if it weren't for the fact that most of those people are bitching about media politically opposed to them, we'd probably get bipartisan support for press restrictions out of spite. You don't want to be in that state as an industry. That's even worse for the industry than the ad revenue problem. Or the
Like,
fact,
especially when, trust is in like real rational trust. It's so important to have that when the, a healthy society depends on you functioning properly and presenting what's true.
Trust isn't a renewable resource for you guys, and trust is what you bake all of your credibility on.
Yeah.
Cultivate trust.
Yes.
Don't cultivate political affiliation because there are people who you will not be able to please on a myriad of political issues, and inevitably you're going to piss off someone who agrees with you on 90% of whatever, but you touched on that one issue that gets them really riled up, and now they've lost faith in you because they already knew you were hacks, but they thought you were pandering to them. Cultivate trust.
Yeah.
Actually, you want to hear? I had one more fun fact that I got in my research that I wanted to share that didn't really kind of come up at any one point, but you want to know actually one of the worst sites in terms of uh, newspaper revenue, specifically
What?
newspaper. Craigslist. Craigslist helped kill newspapers.
Huh.
There were newspapers in the 2000s that had 80% of their revenue coming from classifieds. Guess what Craigslist did?
Oh. Oh
I found
God.
that fascinating. I didn't even think
Huh.
about that. Anyway, I think it's probably time to wrap up. You?
All right. Yeah, and I'll just I'm just gonna say that amusing ourselves to death. It's if you don't want to read it, it's up on Audible.
Oh,
And
is it? I didn't
yeah,
look.
so if you do the 30-day trial, like yeah, the book is about how people are too busy and distracted to read, and like if you can't read a book like that, maybe that says something. And if, to make it easier for people listening to it on audiobook, I think that's something I think will help make people more literate. It's a lot more accessible to listen to audiobooks sometimes.
It's not
So,
just a matter of accessibility. Like for my lunch hour, I always listen to a podcast or an audiobook while I walk around Queen Anne. I mean, it's I can read, but I can also do something physical. So I'm not just sitting in a chair reading for an hour, right?
yeah, and you can look at things too.
And you can think about what you're reading
Hmm.
because you have literally nothing else to do.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'm gonna
Okay.
go ahead and
Uh,
cut off the recording, or do you want to?
I'll just say, thanks for the chat and look forward to more content in the future.
Yep, definitely. We will be back.